You ever open your banking app, see a big cash balance, and still feel weirdly on edge? Like, you've got, say, 20 or 30 grand sitting there, and instead of relief, your brain goes, what if I mess this up? Here's the uncomfortable twist. Once you've got a solid cushion, the save more cash instinct stops being protective and starts being expensive. The strategy that got you stable can quietly keep you stuck. So we're going to do three things. I'll show you what cash is actually formed, and the specific line where safe turns into stagnant. Then we'll walk through where the extra cash should go so it can grow without you feeling reckless. And finally, I'll give you a simple way to automate it so you don't have to think about it every week. Let's make this real with a quick gut check. If you keep $50,000 in cash while prices rise around 4% a year, that's about $2,000 of buying power gone every year. You didn't spend it. Nobody stole it. It just evaporated quietly. And if that cash sits there for 5 years, you're not being conservative. You're paying a hidden bill for the feeling of control. Look, I get why people do it. Cash feels like oxygen. It's immediate. It's certain. It doesn't swing around and mess with your mood. And if you've ever been broke or had a surprise bill knock you flat, having a fat savings account feels like finally locking the door at night. And I'm not here to talk you out of having cash. I'm here to talk you out of having too much cash for too long. Because at a certain point, the real risk isn't volatility. The real risk is opportunity cost that compounds against you. One of the biggest money traps is thinking safety and growth are opposites. They aren't. They're two different jobs. Cash does one job. Investing does another. If you force cash to do the investing job, you don't get extra safety. You get a slow financial leak. So when people say, I'm playing it safe, I always want to ask, safe from what? Safe from a market dip this year? Or safe from being 45 and realizing your money never really started working? Because once your income covers your life and you've got a real emergency fund, the rules shift. You're not trying to survive anymore. You're trying to build. And building with cash is like trying to run a marathon on a treadmill set to 1 mile per hour. You're moving, but you're not going anywhere. Now, let's define the jobs, because this is where people get sloppy and then wonder why their net worth won't budge. Cash has 3 legit jobs. Job 1 is emergencies. The stuff you can't predict and can't ignore. A job loss, a medical bill, a car that decides to quit on a random Tuesday. Job 2 is near-term spending. Money you'll use soon, on purpose. A down payment, a wedding, a move, a big trip, replacing a roof. If you're going to need it in the next couple years, cash makes sense. Job 3 is sleep. A little extra cash that keeps you from spiraling, so you don't make dumb decisions when the world gets noisy. That's it. Cash isn't there to build wealth. Cash is there to prevent chaos. And here's the line most people miss. If you've already covered those 3 jobs, every extra dollar sitting in cash is a dollar you've assigned to doing nothing while time keeps moving. Let's put a clean number on the emergency part, because vague advice like save more is how people end up hoarding. A solid baseline is 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, not your dream lifestyle spending, the boring stuff: housing, food, utilities, insurance, minimum debt payments, transportation. If your essentials are $4,000 a month, that's $12,000 to $24,000. That's the core. If your job's stable, your income's predictable, and you've got family support, you might lean closer to 3 months. If you're self-employed, commission-based, a single-income household, or you've got medical complexity, you might lean closer to 6 months, sometimes a bit more. But notice what I didn't say. I didn't say park $50,000 and call it responsible. I said match the cash to the risk. Here's a common mistake. People count emergency fund as whatever makes me feel calm, and then they keep raising the calm number every time they see a scary headline. That's not an emergency fund. That's an anxiety fund. And it's usually hiding a bigger issue, which is that your plan isn't clear enough to trust. So let's make it clear. Do this week. Write down your essential monthly expenses and multiply it by 4. Not 3, not 6, just 4 as a starting point. That number is your baseline emergency fund target. Put it somewhere boring and safe, like a high-yield savings account, and treat it like a fire extinguisher, not an investment. Now let's talk about the near-term spending bucket, because this is where smart people accidentally sabotage themselves. If you're buying a house in the next year or two, cash makes sense. If you're replacing a car soon and you don't want to finance it, cash makes sense. If you're planning a move, starting a business, paying a tuition bill, cash makes sense. But if you don't have a specific near-term purpose and you're still sitting on a giant pile of cash just because you're not being cautious, you're being unassigned, money without an assignment tends to stay stuck. Now here's the part that stings. Most people aren't holding too much cash because they love cash. They're holding too much cash because they're scared of investing wrong. They're scared they'll buy at the top. They're scared they'll pick the wrong thing. They're scared they'll need the money, the market will be down, and they'll feel stupid. Totally normal fears. But the fix isn't hoarding cash. The fix is choosing a simple investment approach that doesn't require you to be a genius. Let's do a reality check with basic math, because this is where the cash feels safe story starts cracking. If you leave $50,000 in cash for 10 years and inflation averages 3%, you lose roughly a quarter of your purchasing power, not a quarter of the number on the screen, a quarter of what it can buy. Meanwhile, if that same $50,000 is invested in a broad stock index strategy and it averages around 7% over long stretches, it can roughly double over a little more than 10 years. Not guaranteed year to year, but historically that's been the ballpark. That gap is the whole game. It's not a small difference, it's a life difference. And the longer you sit in cash, waiting for the right time, the more you're choosing the worst of both worlds. You're exposed to inflation, but you're not getting paid for it. Another common mistake is people treat investing like a one-time bravery test. Like you either go all in today or you're a coward forever. That's not how adults build wealth. Adults build wealth with systems that still work when you're tired, busy, or stressed. Here's a better approach. Split your money into lanes. Lane 1 is your emergency fund, already covered. Lane 2 is planned spending in the next couple years, also cash. Lane 3 is long-term wealth. That money has one job: grow over time. So now the question becomes simple. How much of your current cash pile belongs in Lane 3? If you've got, say, $30,000 in cash and your essential monthly expenses are $4,000, your emergency fund target might be $16,000. If you don't have any big near-term purchases, that means roughly $14,000 is just floating. That floating cash is a candidate for investing. Not because investing is trendy, because your plan says it's surplus. Now, let's make Lane 3 feel less scary. People get spooked because they think investing means picking individual stocks or guessing which company will win. You don't need that. For most people, a simple mix of broad, low-cost index funds is enough. It's diversified by default. You're not betting on one CEO having a good quarter. You're buying the whole messy, productive economy. And if you're thinking, yeah, but what if I invest and it drops right away? That's not a sign you did it wrong. That's just what markets do. Sometimes. Some years the market homes you right in the stomach and it'll feel personal. But here's the thing, you're not investing for next month. You're investing for future you, the version of you that wants options. Quick pause. If this breakdown is helping your money path feel clearer, hit subscribe. I make calm, honest, deep dives like this every week. Let's bring it back to a simple scoreboard, because you shouldn't need a finance degree for this. If your long-term timeline is 10 years or more, you can afford volatility because time is your shock absorber. If your long-term timeline is 5 years or less, you should be more conservative because you don't have time to recover from a bad stretch. If it's somewhere in the middle, you can blend, not because blending is sexy, but because it matches the job. And notice what we're doing here. We're not chasing the highest return possible. We're matching the money to the timeline so you don't panic. That's how you avoid the biggest wealth killer of all, selling at the worst possible time. Now, let's talk about the sneaky way cash keeps you poor even when you're doing everything right. It makes you lazy with your next move. When you've got a huge cash pile, it feels like progress. You can point to it, you can screenshot it, you can say, look, I'm responsible. But wealth isn't a photo, wealth is a machine. And cash, past a certain point, isn't a machine. It's a parking lot. If you keep money parked because you're waiting to feel ready, you're basically asking your emotions for permission to build your future. Your emotions are terrible managers, so you want a rule that doesn't require feelings. Here's one that works. Keep your emergency fund at your target, keep near-term goal money in cash, and invest the rest on a schedule. Not a mood, a schedule. And the schedule matters more than the perfect moment. Let's do another quick piece of math that people never do out loud. Say you invest $1,000 a month for 20 years at around 7%. You'll contribute $240,000, but the ending value is way higher than that because the growth stacks on top of growth. Now imagine you sit on that $1,000 a month in cash for 5 years because you're waiting, and then you finally start investing. You didn't just lose 5 years of contributions, you lost 5 years of compounding on every contribution you would have made. That's the part that doesn't come back. It's like trying to grow a tree, but you keep pulling it out of the soil to check if it's working. The better approach is boring on purpose. Now, I want to address a fear that's totally rational. What if I invest and then I need the money? That's why we set the emergency fund first. That's why we separated near-term spending. When those lanes are funded, the long-term lane can actually stay long-term. Most people don't fail because investing didn't work. They fail because they invested money they secretly needed soon, then got forced to sell at the worst time. That's not investing. That's mismatch. So if you've been holding too much cash because you're afraid of being trapped, the solution isn't to keep hoarding. The solution is to give your cash a clear job so your investment money doesn't get yanked around. All right, now let's get more practical because I don't want this to stay abstract. If you're sitting on a cash pile and you want to move it into investments without feeling like you're jumping off a cliff, you've got two main options. You can invest it all at once, or you can spread it out over time, like monthly chunks. Mathematically, investing it sooner tends to win more often because markets go up more than they go down over long periods. But emotionally, spreading it out can keep you consistent, and consistency beats a perfect plan you don't follow. So if you're the kind of person who's going to freak out after one bad week, spreading it out might actually be the smarter move for you, even if it's not optimal on paper. Here's a simple way to do it. Take the surplus cash, the amount above your emergency fund and near-term goals, and decide on a timeline like 6 months or 12 months. Then divide it evenly. If you've got $12,000 to invest and you choose 12 months, that's $1,000 a month. If you choose 6 months, that's $2,000 a month. Either way, you're building the habit of moving money into the long-term lane. And once you start, the biggest win isn't the first deposit, it's that you stop negotiating with yourself. Do this week. Set up an automatic transfer that moves a fixed amount from checking to your investment account every payday. Even if it's $200, make it automatic. You're not trying to impress anybody, you're trying to build a default. Now let's talk about the other cash trap. People keep too much cash because they think a big opportunity is coming. They'll say, I'm waiting for a crash, or I'm waiting for rates to change, or I'm waiting until the election is over. And the problem isn't that opportunities don't exist. The problem is that waiting becomes a personality. Because here's what actually happens in real life. When the crash comes, it doesn't feel like a deal. It feels like the world is ending. That's why so many people with tons of cash still don't buy when prices are down. Their brain says, see, I was right to wait. And then it says, but what if it keeps dropping? So they wait again. Then the market recovers faster than they expected, and now they feel like they missed it, so they wait for the next dip, and the cycle repeats. That's how cash becomes a cage. A better approach is to have a plan that invests in any weather. If markets are up, you're buying. If markets are down, you're buying. If everybody's screaming, you're buying. You're not trying to be a hero. You're trying to be consistent. This is where people roll their eyes and call it boring. Good. Boring is the point. Boring builds wealth. Drama builds stories you tell your friends about why you're still getting ready. Now let's talk about what too much cash looks like in the real world, because it's not the same for everyone. If you're living on $4,000 a month and you've got $80,000 in cash with no clear near-term goal, that's probably too much. If you're living on $10,000 a month with variable income and you've got $80,000 in cash, that might be just right. The number isn't morale, the number is functional. So here's a quick self-test. If you lost your job tomorrow, how many months could you cover essentials with your emergency fund? If the answer is more than 6 months, ask yourself why. If it's because I'm scared, okay, that's honest. Then ask what would actually reduce the fear, more cash or a clearer plan? For most people, it's the plan, because fear doesn't disappear when you hit a bigger number. Fear disappears when you trust your process. Now let's hit the second big reason cash keeps you poor. It messes with your identity. When you keep too much cash, you keep living like a person who's one mistake away from disaster. So you stay small, you don't invest, you don't negotiate your salary, you don't apply for that better job, you don't take the class that could raise your income, you don't start the side thing that could become real. Because you're clinging to the pile as proof you're safe. But safety doesn't come from a pile. Safety comes from flexibility. Flexibility comes from a funded emergency plan, low toxic debt, and an income you can grow. If you've got those, you don't need a massive cash hoard, you need a machine. So let's build the machine in a way that doesn't make you feel reckless. Your emergency fund sits in high-yield savings. Your short-term goals sit in cash too because you've got a timeline. Your long-term investing goes into diversified, low-cost funds, and it happens on autopilot. And if you want to add an extra layer of calm, you can keep a small buffer in checking so you don't bounce payments. That's it. Now, let's talk about the part nobody likes to hear. You can't outsave a low income forever. If you're holding extra cash because investing feels complicated, fine, we can fix the investing. But if you're holding extra cash because deep down you don't trust your income, that's a different lever. And it matters because the fastest way to feel safer is to improve the income engine, not just the savings bucket. A $5,000 raise with the same lifestyle is worth way more than shaving $5 off groceries. If you save 20% of your income, a $5,000 raise can turn into $1,000 more invested every year without you feeling squeezed. Over 10 years, that's real money. Over 20 years, that's life-changing. And this is where people get stuck. They focus on the cash pile because it's easier than doing the hard thing, which is leveling up their earning power. So here's a simple decision tree. If you've got high-interest debt, like credit cards at 20%, paying that off beats investing almost every time. That's not about being conservative. That's about math. If you've got no high-interest debt and your emergency fund is funded, then investing the surplus is usually the correct next move. If you're already investing consistently and you've still got a big surplus sitting in cash, that's when you should look at income growth because you've proven you can handle the basics. Now, I want to give you one more common mistake that keeps people in cash forever. They think they need to understand everything before they start. They want to read 10 books. They want to watch 100 videos. They want to know every account type and every tax rule. And that's how they end up with the same bank balance 5 years later, just with more tabs open. You don't need perfect knowledge. You need a simple default. Most of the win comes from time in the market, not brainpower in the market. So your goal is to pick a reasonable setup and then stick with it long enough for compounding to matter. Compounding's weird because it feels slow until it doesn't. At $10,000 invested, a 7% year is $700. Nice, but it doesn't change your life. At $100,000 invested, a 7% year is $7,000. Now it starts feeling like a bonus paycheck. At $500,000 invested, a 7% year is $35,000. That's rent. That's a car. That's options. That's why keeping too much cash keeps you poor. It delays the point where your money starts showing up like a worker. And it's not just growth, it's also behavior. When investments grow, you start making better choices because you see progress. You get momentum. You feel less desperate. When your cash sits there and doesn't move, it feeds the feeling that you're doing everything and nothing's changing. Now, let's make this insanely practical with one clean example. Let's say you spend $5,000 a month on essentials and normal life stuff, and you've got $40,000 in cash. A 4-month emergency fund is $20,000. Let's say you've got no big purchases planned in the next year. That means $20,000 is surplus. If you invest that $20,000 over 10 months, that's $2,000 a month. If the market's flat, you still built the habit. If the market's down, you bought at lower prices. If the market's up, you got in earlier than you would have if you waited. All three outcomes are fine because the win is that you stopped freezing. And to make sure you don't backslide, you decide on a permanent, monthly amount after that, even if it's smaller, like $500 a month, something that keeps the machine running. Now, what about interest rates on savings accounts? People love bringing this up, like it changes everything. Yes, earning 4 or 5% in a high-yield account is better than earning basically nothing. But if inflation's around 3% and taxes take a bite, your real return is still not amazing. Savings interest is nice for your emergency fund. It's not a replacement for long-term investing if your timeline's long. Cash can be a great shield. It's a terrible engine. Now, let's talk about the emotional part again. Because money isn't just math. If you grew up around instability, cash feels like love. It feels like control. It feels like nobody can take it from you. So I'm not going to shame you for wanting it. I'm just going to tell you the truth. Too much cash past your real needs is you paying for comfort with your future, and you don't have to do that. You can keep the comfort and build the future at the same time by giving every dollar a job. So here's the clean setup I'd use if I were you. Emergency fund, 4 months of essentials in a high-yield savings account. Near-term goals, cash, separated, labeled, not mixed with your emergency money. Long-term, automated investing into diversified, low-cost funds tied to your payday. Everything else, live your life without constantly checking your balances like a scoreboard. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but how do I know I won't need more cash? You'll always be able to invent a reason. That's why the plan has to be written down, because if it's just in your head, fear rewrites it whenever it wants. Do this week. Open your Notes app and write a one-paragraph money policy for yourself. Literally, my emergency fund is X. My short-term goal cash is Y. Everything above that gets invested monthly. Then set a reminder to reread it once a month. You're not doing this to be dramatic. You're doing it so you don't negotiate with panic later. Now let's land this. Keeping too much cash keeps you poor because it feels like progress, while it quietly loses ground to inflation. It keeps you waiting